Well, I have the privilege of introducing former Secretary Anthony Foxx, who is currently the Chief Policy Officer and Senior Advisor to the President and CEO at Lyft. In his role, Secretary Foxx works alongside Lyft's co-founders and executive team at the intersection of transportation policy, technology, and public-private partnerships to expand affordable mobility options and improve people's lives with the world's best transportation. From 2013 to 2017, Secretary Foxx led the U.S. Department of Transportation, an agency with more than 55,000 employees, including at the time me. Among his many accomplishments, the DOT established a first ever policy framework for integrating self-driving vehicles and brought attention to the issue we're here to discuss today, restoring neighborhoods divided and damaged by urban highways through a program he named Every Place Counts. And before coming to USDOT, he was the mayor of Charlotte, where they extended Lynx Light Rail under his leadership and created the Charlotte Streetcar Project. So, Secretary Foxx, welcome, and thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be with you, Beth. Good to be on your turf.
Well, I could not think of anybody better to talk about this. There's a lot of momentum around addressing the damage of urban highways, particularly on Black and Brown communities, including legislation introduced just today by Senators Schumer, Carper, Padilla, Markey, and others to help communities reimagine the role of those highways, whether or not they need to be there, ways to reconnect communities, and money to actually do what they plan. I thought it'd be great to start with your perspective on, where we started and where we're moving and what that might mean.
First of all, it's great to join you, and I'm going to try to talk really fast because there's a lot to say. The first thing is that our transportation system is the product of the culture that it sits in, and in our culture, we have obviously a long, very tortured history with race in this country, and even with socioeconomic differences, even extending beyond race. And those are reflected in our transportation system. And it isn't just the freeways, frankly, it's also our airports, our railroads. There are all kinds of ways in which the infrastructure has reinforced the dividing lines that our larger culture recognized. In a 21st century in which we're all together and we're moving towards a more united country, the infrastructure also has to speak to that. And so your point about identifying ways to repurpose transportation facilities, maybe to reimagine them, maybe where there's no real significant travel advantage to even tear some of them down. All of those things should be on the table as we look to the future.
I appreciate that. Now, in your current tenure at Lyft, talk to me about how you all are working on transportation equity and the role that rideshare and the other services of Lyft can play in that.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I really wanted to come to Lyft was because there's a real intersection in the things that I really care about: policy, transportation, the future of cities, as well as some of these issues around equity. And we are doing things like grocery access programs. If you watched 60 Minutes this past week, there was a huge story about how so many health inequities exist in our culture, and grocery access is one of them. We're on the front lines of providing rides to people to get them to healthy grocery stores. We also are working on jobs access programs as well as voting access programs, and we're actually now very involved in the vaccination effort. So we really try to do that with the superpower we have, which is transportation.
And you just recently released an economic impact report revealing how essential workers and racial minorities rely so much on Lyft, particularly through the pandemic. I think a lot of people are surprised and make incorrect assumptions about how people travel. I'd love to hear you talk about what you've learned.
There's quite a bit to learn about there. 46% of the rides started or ended in a low income area. 48% of riders report being members of a racial minority. 51% of riders have used Lyft to get to or from public transit, which a lot of people don't know, and 37% of the riders have used Lyft to get around at times the public transit system doesn't operate. This whole idea of a larger ecosystem of transportation should include these private sector inputs, even as we continue to work to strengthen the public sector. And certainly transit is a critical pillar of our transportation ecosystem. There's also a bike and scooter business that Lyft runs, and we have like 1.8 million new riders have tried bikes and scooters in 2020. 53% of Lyft's shared micromobility riders identify as members of racial or ethnic minority groups. And the median household income of those who use our micromobility services is $56,000, which is hardworking people. So we feel that this service really can continue to be one that provides a support system for people getting to and from places, as well as for drivers.
So in furthering that notion of the transportation system being a mechanism for connecting people to the opportunity and necessities they need, you started talking about this when you were Secretary of Transportation. I'm sure you were talking about it before, but I remember so well you're elevating these issues as Secretary and participating in both the ladders of opportunity work that the White House set up and creating the Every Place Counts design challenge. I'd love for you to talk about that and how that has set us up to be able to take advantage of a potential program to actually change those highways and build bridges over them or take them down.
Yeah, it's interesting, coming from a municipal background, and of course, today is April 20th. I didn't know this when we scheduled this, but this is the 50th anniversary of the Swan decision, which I grew up living under a consent decree, going to schools that were integrated by busing, and that was really my introduction to transportation. But the larger point is that we tried a lot of things to use our administrative power to help address some of these historical inequities. And what it was an umbrella of ladders of opportunity programs, and it extended to Every Place Counts, which was a design charrette program where we picked several communities across the country, urban and rural, where transportation projects had bifurcated communities or in some way harmed what was there before. And we brought the state transportation directors, the city transportation directors, and the community together to begin reimagining those projects. But it wasn't just that. Local hire was part of Ladders of Opportunity, putting equity into our discretionary grant programs and using it as a real filter to understand how to evaluate programs was part of what we did. Safer people, safer streets, working to improve the inequities. 48% of low-income communities in this country have adequate bike and sidewalk, so less than half of them. And so we wanted to draw attention and put resources there. But we were working within executive authority, not within the confines of new legislation and things that could make a big difference. And so I'm very, very pleased and excited to see what the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg will do to raise the bar. And my hope has really been by bringing light to what we did in the Obama years to make sure that's not a ceiling, make sure that's a floor for this administration.
Well, and in testament to that, one of our speakers coming up later in this program is from the Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul, which was one of those sites of your Every Place Counts initiative.
Yeah, that's right.
So you raise things that DOTs can do without Congress, and we'll talk a little bit about the possibility for Congress in a second. But what are other things you'd like to see DOT do on these issues? While still waiting for Congress to act, or in case Congress is unable to act?
Well, I certainly think reestablishing many of these efforts would be table stakes. I'd love to see if there's more that could be done to deal with some of the economic inclusion issues around transportation. We have small minority-owned businesses that can't graduate into the big leagues because they're not big enough yet to be prime contractors, and there's a middle middle level there that doesn't exist right now in federal law, and I would love to see us work on that. There are a ton of things that I think could be done, but I'm going to wait for your question about Congress because I got a lot on that I want to add to the conversation.
Well, I'll just throw in that, some of the things you also started working in is looking at alternatives to, somewhat nerdy issues like measuring transportation success or roadway success based on level of service, and just moving away from an auto-centric approach, since frankly, there are a lot of people that just can't afford an automobile in the first place, and they should be part of this transportation system. So
that's right. That's right.
Thank you for getting that started, and hopefully this DOT takes the ball and runs with it. So let's move on to the American Jobs Act and the reauthorization of our National Surface Transportation Program. I feel like there's a lot to be excited in there. We've mentioned that there's a highway takedown or reimagining program in both the American Jobs Act, and now there's an introduction of something in the Senate. What else are you excited about there, and what are your prognostications?
Well, I think it's big, it's bold. The administration's jumping into this conversation early, which we haven't had happen in I don't know when. So I think it shows a level of seriousness, of purpose, and that'll serve them well. I think something big will get done here, and it's just a question of timing, in my opinion. That said, I do think there are some additional things that should be put on the table for conversation. And I just want to quickly just itemize them, and maybe you guys will debate it later. Not since the Transcontinental Railroad has the federal government actually built stuff at a massive scale. And we have projects that sit between states where you've got to get a lot of political alignment that probably could be federal projects that would allow the federal government to model best practices in public input, model best practices in inclusionary economics of these projects and so forth. People probably think it's a crazy idea, but they thought this inclusion stuff was crazy a few years ago. So I'll throw it out there. We should have a permanent support of operating support for our transit systems in this country.
Yes.
The crisis has
Agreed.
given us a reason to have that conversation. I think we need to have it. We should have equity standards for boards of transportation in our country. Many of them are not diverse at all. That has an impact on what gets built and who builds it. And I think that's a critical point. And we should also, this is another crazy idea, but one that I think is important. Most cities around the country have a planning commission. Most cities around the country have planners that work to help tell the story of where we're going and how we're going to get there. We need a national planner. I want a Tony Fauci of planning in this country who can be the truth teller, that has a 10-year term and can help tell the story over time and be someone as a resource and a truth teller to policymakers across the country. Those are just a few ideas. I have more, but I don't have time.
I love that suggestion. It is 100 years to this year since the federal government got intertwined in planning policy under Herbert Hoover when he was at the Department of Commerce. I think that is just crazy enough to work. And considering your crazy ideas a few years ago were to look at reconnecting neighborhoods, maybe people will listen as they should. Thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, your crazy ideas, and I look forward to working with you on all this going forward.
You got it. Thanks so much, Beth.